This episode is sponsored by Archeo Gato Tours. Want to dig deeper into Mexico's indigenous past and present? Allow Archeo Gato Tours to customize your Yucatan adventure. Archeo Gato works hand in hand with local indigenous guides to provide a tour that is entertaining, educational, and beneficial to the local community. For an adventure like no other, check out archeogato.com. That's ARKEOGATO.com. Or just follow the link in the show notes. Now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so,
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Atlantis. We are your hosts, Kurly Tlapoyawa
and Ruben Arellano Tlacatecat.
The Second Mandate of Anahuac.
On November 26, 1988, a person by the name of Ramón Tirado delivered the Consigna del Sexto Sol, Segunda Consigna de Anáhuac, or the Mandate of the Sixth Sun, Second Mandate of Anahuac, at the Convención de Anáhuac, or the Anahuac Convention, which was held in Mexico City. The convention occurred on the eve of what would become the resurgence of indigenous nations and the 500 years of resistance movement. In just a few short years, the Western world would gather to celebrate the invasion of the so-called American continents and its supposed discoverer, Cristoforo Colombo, aka Christopher Columbus. In anticipation of this, indigenous people from the North and South began convening in events like this one to organize contestations to the centennial celebrations to come. However, despite the name of the convention and the delivery of a speech modeled after the Consigna or Declaration of Cuauhtémoc, which we've covered here before, as we just noted, this was not an indigenous-centered event. Rather, it was a gathering of political activists who were responding to the political dominance of the PRI, Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or the Institutional Revolutionary Party, and the widespread belief that it engaged in electoral fraud as well as concerns over the rise of neoliberal policies. The Convención de Anáhuac lasted several days, during which various speakers delivered speeches and read reports of the working commissions of the group. It is useful to note here that the Convención de Anáhuac was more than a gathering. It turned into an organized movement within a faction of the newly formed political party, the PRD, Partido de la Revolución Democrática, or the Democratic Revolution Party. As protests against the recent election began to subside, the more radical faction of the PRD, particularly the Asamblea de Barrios, or Assembly of Neighborhoods, initiated the Convención de Anáhuac, which convened not only in the final days of November, but also throughout December of 88 through January of 1989. Under the Convención platform, they were able to bring together individual citizens and social organizations to denounce electoral fraud and demand expanded democratic space in Mexico City. Initially conceived as a pluralistic forum, the Convención adopted a flexible structure aimed at addressing the city's most pressing challenges. These included improvement in city government, ecology and energy, general employment, base salaries and social benefits, and the issue of free commerce. In general, populist events like these were usually attended by concerned citizens who sought the advancement of social and civil rights for the inhabitants of Mexico City and the nation overall. But these struggles were not new and unique to the 1980s. Their roots lay in the post-Mexican Revolutionary era, but more specifically in the protests and upheavals of the late 1960s. The emergence of a movement.
The 1968 student movement ignited a broader social upheaval. While primarily composed of students, its core demands focused on expanding civil and political rights and increasing opportunities for public participation. This movement's enduring significance lies in its impact on citizen engagement in the political realm. The direct effects included legislative changes in civil, social, and political rights. For instance, the definition of so-called crimes of social dissolution was revised to foster human rights awareness and support the struggle for political prisoners. This in turn fueled the social movements of the 1970s and 1980s. Labor reforms, such as reduced work hours and expanded Social Security benefits, were partly influenced by the movement's momentum as well. Indirectly, the movement spurred nationwide calls for university democratization and opposition to emerging privatization trends. It also catalyzed the unionization of university staff and innovative educational initiatives like self-governance. Politically, the movement laid the groundwork for subsequent reforms. Its influence is evident in the rise of social movements and guerrilla groups during the early 1970s, many of which included former student activists. This era marked the emergence of numerous small-scale social groups, empowering citizens to shape civil organizations from the ground up. While not a revolutionary uprising, this collective action fostered a new civic consciousness and a desire for democratic participation. Ultimately, the 1968 movement accelerated the demand for political reform, profoundly influencing citizen engagement and shaping the trajectory towards democracy. During the Echevarria and López Portillo administrations, the movement expanded citizen participation in 3 distinct phases. Initially, a predominant strategy of electoral abstention emerged among the radical left, challenging the legitimacy of the government and reflecting widespread public distrust in the electoral process. This stance was influenced by the brutal repression of 1968 and the subsequent rise of urban guerrilla groups, which created an environment hostile to institutional participation. While some factions embraced armed struggle, these guerrilla groups ultimately faced isolation, repression, and eventual demise. Their focus on clandestine operations and terrorist acts alienated them from the broader population and hindered their ability to effect meaningful change. As the guerrilla movement waned, a shift toward electoral participation began, particularly at the municipal level. Citizens mobilized around issues of corruption, poor governance, and unmet social needs. These local struggles fostered a growing awareness of the power of the vote and the potential for influencing public policy through elected office. However, the competitive nature of local politics also led to divisions within the movement as different groups vied for control of municipal resources. Eventually, these experiences laid the groundwork for the broader political reforms that would follow. The third phase of this period was political reform. The government initiated this process as a strategic response to the growing social unrest and delegitimization it faced since 1968. By offering electoral concessions, the government aimed to channel leftist dissent within the institutional framework. If it could direct it, it might be able to control it. New political horizons.
A portion of the left saw this as an opportunity and embraced the electoral arena. However, parties like the PCM, Partido Comunista Mexicano, or the Mexican Communist Party, the PRT, Partido Revolucionario de los Trabajadores, or Workers' Revolutionary Party, and the PMT, Partido Mexicano de los Trabajadores, or Mexican Labor Party, all these demanded a more comprehensive reform that extended beyond elections. They targeted government authoritarianism and worked to secure genuine civil and political rights. The political reforms of 1977 legalized some previously outlawed opposition groups, but it fell short of establishing a truly democratic system. While representing progress, the reform was limited to electoral processes, leaving broader issues of political participation and state structure untouched. The opposition sought a more substantial transformation, including freedom of association, independent political parties, and a reduction of presidential power. The government's strategy was twofold: legitimize the regime and control the opposition. By co-opting elements of the left, the government risked empowering a more critical opposition. Ultimately, the latter scenario unfolded. The expanded electoral space, without corresponding democratic reforms, created a system fraught with tensions. The 1979 entry of communist deputies into Congress did not quell the broader opposition. The PAN, the PAN, Partido Acción Nacional, or National Action Party, gained strength. Electoral fraud persisted, and the government's attempts to manage the opposition through the electoral process proved increasingly ineffective. Despite political reforms, the state's grip on civil society remained substantial. The left's response was complex and adapted to new institutional realities while criticizing their limitations. This led to a degree of reformism, a blurring of ideological lines, and a shift away from revolutionary rhetoric. It can be argued that these political parties overemphasized electoral tactics at the expense of grassroots organizing. While opposition groups undoubtedly evolved from spontaneous to more structured entities, they also fostered diverse forms of participation and challenged the political establishment. This dynamic altered the nature of class conflict and increased the cumulative impact of social activism on institutions. Over time, these diverse actions have helped shape the overall political landscape in Mexico, but more importantly for us here, these political upheavals, changes, revolutions, and evolutions have also influenced indigenous activism. The 1994 uprising of the EZLN, the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, aka the Zapatistas, is a great example of this anti-neoliberal tradition. But the reverse is also true. Indigenous voices have also helped shape the rhetoric and ideologies of modern Mexican politics. This is clearly the case with the public recitation by Ramón Tirado of the Consigna del Sexto Sol, a speech which he introduces as having first been delivered in February of that year, 1988, at a velación ceremony at the Templo Mayor. In his speech, Tirado makes the case for organizing the government of Mexico City based on the principles of Mexica governance, hence the speech which he borrowed from a council of elders espousing Mexicayot rhetoric. So he states, "It wouldn't be surprising if the council in reference was affiliated in some way with the MCRCA, Movimiento Confederado Restaurador de la Cultura de Anahuac, or the Confederated Restoration Movement of Anahuac, which we've also covered in this podcast.
I would be surprised if they were not involved some way.
Or even that of one of its offshoots, the Anahuac Tlamachtiloyan, which loosely translates to Escuela de los Pueblos Indígenas de Anahuac, or the School of Indigenous Peoples of Anahuac, the latter of which was founded by none other than Mexica leader Miguel Ángel Mendoza Cuauhcoat and the renowned Mexica Sundance chief Francisco Jiménez Tlacaelel, both of whom I believe are deceased. This is the context for the speech that you're about to listen to. We're going to play you a clip of the speech that Ramón Tirado delivered at the Convención de Anáhuac, and then afterwards it'll be followed by a translation of that speech.
We'll be back after a quick break.
This episode of Tales from Astlantis is brought to you by Astlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck, because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromatlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
Compañeros, hace 500 años Cuauhtémoc, nuestro último jefe mexica, queremos resistir todos estos años. Se llamó la Consigna de Anáhuac. Tan solo sabían que Cuauhtémoc había mandado tapar los templos, esconder algunas cosas. Pero la consigna de Cuauhtémoc fue muy precisa y fue la que nos dirigió en la resistencia durante todos estos años. Y decía, hoy, mexicanos, nuestro sol se ha ocultado y nos ha dejado en la más completa oscuridad. Sabemos que va a salir para alumbrarnos de nuevo, pero mientras permanezca oculto en el Mictlán, en esta noche de opresión, nuestro sol, que es el quinto sol, será un sol de conciencia, y necesitamos ocultar nuestros templos, nuestros teocaltin, nuestros calmecame, nuestras escuelas de altos estudios, nuestros tlaxcohuan. Todo lo necesitamos ocultar para poder resistir, y de hoy en adelante vamos a dejar las calles desiertas y el invasor no se va a enterar de nada. Y por eso en nuestras casas serán los padres quienes lleven de la mano a sus hijos mientras vivan. Pasaron 500 años, compañeros, y este quinto sol nos lo dijeron los jefes de la tradición mexica el 22 de febrero de 1988 en una velación en el Templo Mayor. Nos dijeron, ya viene el sexto sol, acaba el quinto sol, que es un sol de conciencia, de opresión que sufrimos durante 500 años. Y este nuevo sol será un sol de justicia. Y ha llegado el momento de dar a conocer nuestra manera de dialogar y de ser de los mexicanos. Ha llegado el momento de salir a las calles y llenar las calles y los cantos de campos. Y tomando ese espíritu de los jefes de la tradición que hicieron posible que nuestra cultura sobreviviera, esta Convención de Anáhuac declara la consigna del sexto sol, la segunda consigna de Anáhuac, y dice así: hoy, este año 2 pedernal de 1988, nuestro sol ya volvió a salir y empieza a alumbrarnos de nuevo. Durante la larga noche en que permaneció en el Mictlán, los mexicanos hemos resistido por 500 años, dispersos por necesidad. Pero desde los abuelitos más antiguos se viene enseñando la costumbre para que no se pierda. Alegrémonos, mexicanos. Y ahora que vuelve a amanecer para nosotros, reconstruyamos nuestros teocaltin, templos, nuestros calmecame, escuelas de altos estudios, nuestros tlaxcohuan, juegos de pelota, nuestros telpochcaltin, escuelas para jóvenes, y nuestros cuicacaltin, casas de cantos, y llenemos las calles y los campos de cantos para restaurar nuestra nación y que desde aquí vuelva a brillar el nuevo sol. No olvidemos decir a nuestros hijos que el Anáhuac es de ahora en adelante la nación del sexto sol y que a los cuatro vientos habremos de dar a conocer nuestra manera de dialogar y organizarnos, de hacernos sobrios y recios de cuerpo y pensamiento, de ayudarnos los unos a los otros en todos los trabajos y faenas colectivas de cada comunidad y cada barrio. Tampoco olviden las generaciones enseñar a sus hijos a cuidar y a defender a la naturaleza, como lo han venido haciendo nuestros mayores, que han podido guardar lo comunal hasta hoy en día. Bien han valido la pena sacrificios y vidas ofrendadas para que se guardara esta costumbre. Nos mermaron, sí, como la tusa merma la milpa, pero no acabaron con lo principal, que es el maíz y la forma de sembrarlo, siguiendo la cuenta de las vueltas en el cielo y en solidaridad. Seguiremos encendiendo las velas en recuerdo de los que fueron perseguidos y murieron en el sacrificio. Y también encenderemos las velas en memoria de todos nuestros jefes: Tenoch, Acamapixtli, Huitzilihuitl, Chimalpopoca, Izcoatl, Motecuzoma y Huicamina, Axayacatl, Tizoc, Ahuizotl, Motecuzoma Socoyotzin, Huitláhuac, Cacama, Tetlepanquetzali, Cuauhtemotzin, Zapata, Jaramillo, y por todos los jefes que han caído por nosotros. Mexicanos, nos amanece apenas y muchos trabajos tendremos todavía que pasar, pero ya pasó la hora más negra cuando aletea el zopilote en el silencio más oscuro de la noche de opresión y la vida peligra y no se sabe ni el rumbo, como nos sucedía hasta hace poco. Encenderemos también las velas en memoria de toda la generación de jóvenes que cayeron por el pueblo en las fechas recientes antes de esta alba, justo en las vísperas de que se supiera esta buena nueva. De hoy en adelante, la asamblea comunitaria será la que decida. Solo será autoridad quien con su entrega al pueblo se la gane, y a los que les queme la vara de mando, que la suelten primero por voluntad propia. Si no, el pueblo le pedirá que deje su lugar a otro, y si persiste en sus errores, el pueblo y nuestros nuevos jefes de ahí lo quitarán. De hoy en adelante, los ancianos serán respetados y ellos, los tlatoanes, nos orientarán en los pasos difíciles por dar. Los consejos de ancianos serán restituidos, y así con el lugar que ocupan la mujer y el niño, porque la mujer toda esta noche de opresión fue la que primero defendió y guardó, y los niños de nuevo serán lo más sagrado. De hoy en adelante nos mantendremos hombro con hombro, escudo con escudo, a defender lo nuestro, pero a la luz, abiertamente, mano a mano con todos, para que las flores y los cantos regresen a nosotros y podamos, con la frente en alto, recibir la luz de la justicia y la unidad con que brilla el sexto sol. ¡Adelante, mexicanos!
Translation. This will be read by Kurly, and it is from the written transcription published in the New Visions of Aztlán Journal, 1992.
Today, this year, to Flint of 1988, our sun has risen and begins to shine on us again. During the long night in which it remained in Mictlan, we Mexicans resisted for 500 years, dispersed by necessity. But since the days of the oldest ancestors, our tradition has been taught so that it is not lost. Let us rejoice, Mexicans, now that dawn is breaking for us again. Let us rebuild our Teocaltin temples, our Tlaxcoan ball courts, our Calmecame schools of study, in our Cuicacaltin houses of songs, to restore our nation, and that from here the new sun may shine again. Let us not forget to tell our children that Anahuac is from now on the nation of the sixth sun, and that to the four winds we will make it known, our way of dialoguing, of organizing ourselves, of becoming sober and strong in body and thought, of helping each other in all the work and collective tasks of each community and each neighborhood. Let the generations also not forget to teach their children to care for and defend nature, as our elders have been doing, who have been able to preserve what is communal until today, and to those we lost preserving our tradition. They diminished us, yes, as the gopher diminishes the cornfield, but they did not destroy the main thing, which is the corn and the way of sowing it, and following the count of the turns in the sky in harmony. We will continue to light candles in memory of those who were persecuted and died in sacrifice, and in memory of all our leaders, Tenoch, Acamapichtli, Huitzilihuitl, Chimalpopoca, Itzcoat, Moteoxoma Ilhuicamina, Axayacat, Tizoc, Ahuitzot, Moteoxoma Xocoyotzin, Cuitláhuac, Cacama, Tetlepanquetzali, Cuauhtémoc, Zapata, Jaramillo, and all who have fallen for us. It is just dawning, and we still have a lot of work to do. But the darkest hour has passed, when the vulture flutters in the darkest silence of the night, when life is in danger and we don't even know where to go, as happened to us recently. That is why we will also light the candles in memory of the generation of young people who fell for the people in recent days before dawn, right on the eve of hearing of this good news. From now on, the community assembly will be decisive. Only the one who earns their dedication to the people will be given authority, and they who are burned by the staff of governance should let it go of their own accord. If not, the people will ask them to leave their place to another, and if they persist in their errors, the people and our new leaders will remove them. From now on, the elders will be respected, and they, the Tlatoanis, will guide us in the difficult steps to take. The councils of elders will be restored, and so will the place of the woman and the child, because the woman was the first to guard and defend through this long night, and the children will again be the most sacred. From now on, we will stand shoulder to shoulder and shield to defend what is ours, but in the light, openly, hand in hand with everyone, so that the flowers and the songs may return to us, and with our heads held high, we can receive the light of unity and justice with which the sixth sun shines. Onward, Mexicans. Mexico Tenochtitlan, November 26th, 1988.
Tiahui.
That's actually a pretty dope speech.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's...
Yeah, I really like that it follows... I mean, it's basically the second half of the so-called Declaration of Cuauhtémoc, right? Whereas Cuauhtémoc was saying, take all these things and hide them, right? Our sun has left us, but we know it will shine again. Our sun has gone to Mictlan, and we're going to have to hide our teocalis inside of our homes. We're going to have to hide our ball courts inside of ourselves, and we're going to have to keep in secret all of these traditions because we know people are coming to take them away, right? Yeah. And this is a declaration, literally, of saying, okay, we did that, and now it's time to re-emerge. You know, our sun has emerged from Mictlan, and all of these things we're going to do, but we're going to do them out in the open, and we're going to stand side. I liked that line: stand side by side and shield to shield.
I know that's a really good line.
Yeah, and that we're going to do it all out in the open, and we're going to reinstitute the sacredness of our elders and of our women and of our children, and that we're going to go back to the way that our ancestors had done things. So it's really cool, man. I actually got chills reading it. It was pretty badass.
So, I mean, before we continue, because, I mean, I want to respond to a few things you said, I do want to make a note here that the original audio for this, I happened to find it after I went into this deep dive searching for keyword terms. I was searching for Convención de Anáhuac. I was searching for la Segunda Consigna del Sexto Sol. I mean, I was plugging in a bunch of words through the various search engines, and I don't know how this was like deep into the night. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning. I was doing this, and I was like half asleep, and I had just happened to find this clip that was posted in a database somewhere, and I copied I copied the link to that, but now the link isn't working. So I don't know if it was because I was using it through some portal that just happened to be open somehow. But I've tried to go back. And the reason I say this is because just in case someone's looking for the original clip, those of you that are old school like we are might remember that back in the day we had cassette recorders that you could take out into the field and like do interviews. And if you know anything about those cassettes, when you play them back, they're slower than the actual conversation you had. They sound like slower.
Yeah, and they degrade over time.
And that was the case with this. I was listening to this. And so there's various cassette tapes that someone recorded of the various speeches that were done that day. And this one happens to be the very first file in that series. And it was the very first speech in that 1 hour long recording. So I lucked out because I hit play and I'm like, oh, wow, there it is. It's like the very first speech.
Yeah. Do you know if this was the speech that started the whole convention? Because it would be apropos.
I think so. I think this was the first speech that kicked off that convention in November 26th of 1988, which lasted a few days at least, maybe 3 days, but for sure it was 2 days. So I clipped it. I had to capture the audio in real time because the website didn't allow me to download the file. And so what I did then is I ran it through the audio processor. I sped up the pitch and the tempo of the speech to make it sound more natural. And so I tried to balance between making the sound too fast and too slow. And so what you heard is what I think it sounded like in real time. It could have been a little bit faster. It could have been a little bit slower. But so I did some minor adjustments. I also edited out a lot of noise. If you notice from the beginning of the clip, there's a lot of like background noise where it sounds like they're moving the tape recorder around a little bit, trying to find the perfect spot to place it, and you hear a lot of bumps and stuff. And so I tried my best to minimize those in between the pauses. Other than that, this is the original clip. But for instance, those of you that followed our podcast since the beginning and you've listened to the episode that we did on the Consigna de Cuauhtémoc and how we basically say, look, it's a great message, and we used to subscribe to it. Not that we don't subscribe to it anymore. The only difference now we would say is that we don't attribute it to Cuauhtémoc himself. Like, we understand that this was something that is a product of the 20th century that came out of some of these indigenous Mexicanist groups from Mexico City. And if we take these two speeches and place them side by side, they're basically both of the same tradition, right? Tirado, I'm not sure if he was connected because I tried to find information on Ramón Tirado to see who he was in all this, and I had very little success in finding any information on him. He might have been someone who not only was a political activist, but maybe he was connected to the tradición, to the danza in some way, and he happened to be at that velación, and then maybe asked if he could use that speech for the convention that he was about to participate in. I mean, that could be the case, But if you take both of these two speeches, and like you were saying, this sounds like the second half of the first one, right? Like, if the Tradición Mexicayo had been honest from the very beginning and had said, look, we don't know what our ancestors, we have an idea of what they went through, but we don't really know because we weren't there and their voices weren't recorded at the time. But we can imagine, for instance, Cuauhtémoc, if he surrendered, because there's also that controversy. Did he surrender, or was he captured on his way to get
trying to
reinforcements?
escape on a boat? Yeah.
Right? There's that version of events as well. So which one is it? It can't be both. Either he was trying to get reinforcements or he was surrendering. Anyway, whichever version of events you accept. But like, if the Mexicayo leaders of the middle of the 20th century, people like Luna Cárdenas, people like Nieva López and Stanislao Ramirez, who supposedly is attributed as being the author of the speech, right?
Yeah.
If they had just come clean from the very beginning and said, look, we don't know, we have no idea, but we can imagine our ancestors, maybe Cuauhtémoc, maybe someone else, having delivered such a speech to our people.
Yeah, maybe they felt it just didn't carry the same power as like forging this nationalist myth, right?
Right.
Like, there's more power in attributing it to, no, this is what Cuauhtémoc said, and it was held in secret, and now the word is getting out of this tradition of this speech that he had given. Like, it's much more sexy, right?
Right. But they didn't anticipate, I guess where I'm going with this is they didn't anticipate someone doing like a response speech to
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? Because now that we have both, it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. We have the original speech that is attributed to Cuauhtemoc that says we have to hide our stuff and keep it in secret and save it for the future. And then we have the second half of the speech now telling us, hey, it's time to bring it, back and recover our place in the world and be proud of who we are and bring back the houses of worship and the schools and all this good stuff. And I'm like, wow. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, man. I really don't know. I think I agree with you that it's a very moving speech. It's equally moving, if not more so, than the one attributed to Cuauhtemoc, because we know for a fact that this one had to have been done by someone in the 1980s during that time when the Mexicayot movement and the danza movement were really gaining steam. And as I stated in the beginning, as they're kind of leading towards that moment where you're going to have indigenous groups from North and South contesting and resisting and rejecting the celebrations of the Columbus quincentenary so-called discovery of the Americas, right? And so it's leading up to that. Even though this is a political moment, there's a sense of that's taking place with this individual, Tirado, borrowing that speech, right, from this velación that he claims to have attended at the Templo Mayor, which I was curious about. And I asked you too before we started recording, like, was the Templo Mayor already open to the public in 1988? Or parts of it? Were they allowing people to have ceremony and velaciones at the Templo Mayor at that time?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of The Four Disagreements? Just visit talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show. Yeah, that sounds what I'm picturing in my mind if you've been to the Templo Mayor, because there's this little plaza that sits between the Catedral and the Templo Mayor. I'm imagining they would have held it there.
Okay.
Because that's where a lot of danzantes congregate to do danza.
That would make sense.
Right between the two.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But yeah, as far as it being open to the public, I don't know, because you had that massive earthquake just like 3 years prior.
3 years prior, right.
And I don't know the work that would have gone into, or how badly the Templo Mayor was damaged. I actually don't know. That would be something interesting to look into. But yeah, I imagine that they were in that little plaza between the two buildings.
Well, I mean, that question really piqued my interest, and so I started digging in through my other materials that I have here, and I recalled that in Yolot González Torres' book, Danza tu Palabra, La Danza de los Concheros, published in, I believe, 2005.
Great
so
book,
roughly,
by the way. About
20 years now, close to it. Yeah, it's a wonderful book. If you're interested and you want to take a deep dive into the history of the danza conchera and its various offshoots, my article just kind of scratches the surface. Yolot here, she takes a very deep dive. And so, at least in my copy of the book on page 181, she does reference that in 1988 there was a velación that took place. I'm going to read it in Spanish and then try to do a quick translation in English. It says, en 1988, en una velación ante varios jefes, nombró como su heredero al entonces capitán Jesús León Salgado, actual dirigente de insignias aztecas. Nanita, who she's referencing here, murió en 1993. La última danza de Nanita fue el 1 de diciembre de 1993, etc. And so basically what she's saying is that in 1988, Nanita, who used to be the jefa of Insignias Aztecas, a danzante corporation that goes back all the way to the 1920s, if I'm not mistaken. And so she is naming her successor in 1988. I guess she's already, maybe she feels like her health is in decline and she needs to, pick who's going to take charge of Insignias Aztecas when she's gone. And sure enough, by 1993, she's passed away. And I was trying to see if maybe this could be the connection to the velación that Ramón is referencing, where he got this speech from, because it's in 1988. Then that's the only date that's given. There's no month, there's no day, there's no other information given about that velación that Nanita Bernanita named her successor. But I'd be curious to note if Ramon was part of those conversations that were taking place at that time.
Yeah. Were you going to translate?
Well, I basically just did a loose translation.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that's a good point. I wonder if they were connected. Because like I said, I would be surprised if this convention of Anahuac didn't have some representation, some representatives from the, at least, if not the MCRCA, then the offshoot groups like you mentioned. Because especially considering that Nieva Lopez was very involved in politics, right? Like
yeah.
He wanted to run for president.
Right.
And all of these things.
And the other connection to all this is, there's a reference in the speech here where they talk about the young people who have died, who perished, right? I mean, they're basically referencing the students who were massacred in 1968 in that speech. I mean, that's what I gather from it, right?
Yeah, that's what I got from it too.
Because if you read the context, right, if you go back and listen to the context that we just presented here before we played the speech, and if you go back in time and you look at these various movements, a lot of this nationalist rhetoric, a lot of this populist movement, a lot of left-leaning and communist-leaning groups that emerged at that time and during the student movement, right? And they were persecuted. And then also you have the connection of the Reginistas, the story of that young lady who was supposed to have been an anointed person who had lived in Tibet and had met the Dalai Lama and was a learned individual, an enlightened person, and who had led students or a movement of some sort during this time as well. But that whole movement of the Reginistas, they're basically a movement of Mexicanidad, a type of nationalist movement that borrowed ideas from Mexicayot and that borrowed ideas from Danzantes and sort of came up with their own repackaged version of that.
And I want to look into that story more because I've always thought, what other ideas did they borrow from? Because her story reminds me of, the Ascended Masters, right? I wonder if there's a modern version of followers that look at her as, an Ascended Master and Star Children and all that shit. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I'll have to go poke.
Well, maybe we need to have a Reginista on the show. Hey, any Reginistas out there, if you're listening, give us a shout, and maybe we'll have you on the show.
If you made it this far through the podcast, and you weren't turned off by episode 2 out of sheer hate. If you're hate listening to us,
I'm sure we have some of those as well. So back to the speech. What else stood out to you in this speech, right? I mean, so we talked about the line of the shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, and about honoring the women and the children, the young people who were massacred, and what was the other thing that you mentioned? Just the sheer fact that it's kind of like the continuation, like the part 2. I mean, they do call it La Segunda.
Yeah.
Right? Segundo Mandate de Anahuac, second mandate of Anahuac.
And we talk about this in the episode we did on the Declaration of Cuauhtémoc. You have that suspiciously similar speech from the Crónica Mexicayot.
Yeah.
Which
that
basically
seems to be
says
the original source of that one, right?
Yeah, it's what it feels like when you read it. It's like, well, it's basically saying the same thing, But what I really liked about this one, let me see if I could find it, is when he talks about how we've been diminished in the same way that, animals diminish the cornfields. Mm-hmm. But the corn and our knowledge, the way of sowing the corn remains, right? And I don't know, I just thought that was really cool. You messed with the earth, but we could still grow in it, and we could still rise from it. They tried to bury us, Ruben.
I had a feeling you were going to go there. I saw it coming.
No, but all jokes aside, I really like that line. I like the idea that, we're still going to grow because you didn't destroy our knowledge of growing, So I thought that was cool.
Do you think that in a way this speech reinforces the mythology of the first one, of the first mandate?
I wonder how many people would read this and even know about the first one. Although I guess if you're reading this, you probably know.
Well, I mean, you do make a good point. I mean, the people where it was, if it's true that this was first delivered at a velación, then people at the velación more than likely.
Yeah.
Some people, maybe, because not all danzantes, especially at that time, were necessarily deep into Mexicayo, right? Mexicayo and danza have always maintained a separation. There's a lot of overlap, especially nowadays, but even back then, like, the separation was more distinct. So you might have had some people who knew of the Consigna, the Cuauhtémoc, but the people at the Convention of Anáhuac, who happen to be more political, that aren't necessarily connected to danza or the tradición in any way, do you think those people would have known? I mean, because he does introduce it at the beginning, right? But he doesn't really provide that background context as to why this is the second. What happened to the first one? Like, you know, I wonder if someone after the fact, you know, went and talked to him. Hey, I like what you said. So you say this is the second one? You know, maybe is there a first one to this? I'd like to hear it. I'd like to know it. So you know, you could have had that kind of interaction taking place. But I think for the most part, and these conventions, these gatherings, these political gatherings were well attended by a lot of people in Mexico at the time. Because I remember as a kid, you know, this is in the 80s, we used to, as a family, we used to visit relatives a lot more back then. And I do remember there was always a lot of political activity and a lot of political action taking place. I remember the various placards that would be plastered all over the walls, and the various political slogans that are painted on some walls. And I remember from back then seeing the PRD, the PRD, the Partido del Trabajo. I mean, I would see all that, and it always used to intrigue me, because even as a kid in the 80s, like, I already knew, like, in the American context, you had Republicans and Democrats, right? I was that kind of kid that paid attention to that sort of stuff. I was nerdy like that. So it would always intrigue me when I would go to Mexico and I would see that they had, like, it seemed to me like dozens of political parties everywhere you went with different names. In the family, we had family members in Mexico who were deeply involved with some of these things, right? Through their work, contacts and things like that, or just being local representatives of whatever political faction that they happened to be involved with. And so they would talk about this stuff. And so I remember, like, there was always a lot of, you know, kind of like what you're seeing now, right? With the conventions for the presidential election that are currently taking place. But it seemed like in Mexico, it was always happening all the time. Like, no matter the year, whether it was a presidential election year or not, every year we went to visit, there always seemed to be a lot of political activity taking place at that time.
And there was always a truck with a really shitty speaker.
Oh, yeah.
Driving around the neighborhood. Like, I'm like, God damn, what is that?
Yeah. I do remember those two. So,
and then one thing I remember is, you know, you'd have, because they would just paint directly on the walls, right? The logos of each party. Right. But then they would have a circle with an X.
An X, yeah.
And I always thought that meant, like, they were anti.
Right, they were crossing
because in the United
out.
States, you're crossing them out. But, you know, later they're like, no, that means vote for them.
Vote for them, yeah.
Shit.
Yeah, that was also confusing to me at first until I finally figured it out. Oh, okay, I see. They want you to vote for them with that X.
So this speech, did Tirado provide any other context of, like, who he got it from specifically? Like, did anybody claim authorship of it?
And that's it. Like, so the journal, the New Visions of Aztlán, doesn't provide any authorship. It just accredits it to having been delivered at the Convención de Anáhuac, which is where I got that from. And so I started looking at Convención de Anáhuac, and it led me to the tapes, and it led me to Tirado, that clip that we just heard. But besides what he says at the beginning, where he attributes it to having heard it from Adavelacion, and that that there's a council apparently of elders. That's it. There's no like proper names given of anyone or a group name given. And as I said earlier too, like looking up Tirado's name, Ramón Tirado, doesn't. I mean, it produces results, but not anything that is associated with this. So I had no success in tracking down. But maybe one of our listeners out there might have heard of this before. Maybe has intimate connection to this through family relations. That could be able to provide us with some insight. And if we ever do get some more information about this speech and Tirado, the Convención de Anáhuac, and its connection to Danza Mexicayo, if there is any, then we will be sure to let our listeners know.
Yeah, and tell me the truth, how stoked were you to find the recording?
Oh man,
for this.
I was like super excited. I mean, I was jumping up and down in my seat. I'm like, I could not believe I had found the actual recording of the speech. Because, as a historian, when you have one source, I mean, that's just one source. But when you have multiple sources, especially a speech of a written text that you found, I mean, it just reaffirms that connection that you have with the sources, and it just adds more value to what you're trying to say about that, right?
It literally, I was going to say, it feels like finding treasure when you're doing research. When you pull up that one piece and you're like, oh, shit.
I mean, I can imagine, like, for you being in the field, right, and finding an artifact that has been in the ground for thousands of years, and you happen to be the first human to come around and uncover that after many years.
You're the first person to hold it in your hand.
Hold it in your hand.
After so long. And you could, sometimes you see the fingerprints, especially if it's pottery, you'll see fingerprints on the insides of the bowls. And it's like, wow.
Wow, that's amazing. And so as far as this recording goes, I'm not sure if anyone else has used it in research. I would have to dig deeper to see if anyone's actually listened to the tapes that have been, they've only been recently digitized. I think they go back to like 2015, so maybe 10 years at this point. And so sometimes things will get digitized, but just because they're digitized doesn't mean that they're being accessed. For instance, this is not a good analogy, but when I was still dissertating, speaking of Juan Luna Cárdenas, and I think I shared that audio with you at one point. I was at the Benson, and I was looking for material about Luna Cárdenas, and I discovered that he had. This is before I found out that he had taught there for a semester. I discovered that not only had he visited Austin, but that he had been interviewed for a show on the Longhorn radio network. I think the show was called La Onda at the time. And so they discussed, things that were relevant to the Mexican-American Chicano community. And they interviewed him because he was there for some meeting of some sort. And and the reporter happened to be at that same meeting, and she interviewed him. But then he also did a separate TV show, local TV show from Austin, if I'm not mistaken. I had to go back and check my notes. And this was I forget what it's called, but it's a kind of tape. It's not a cassette tape. This is before beta. It was a weird tape that had its own playback device, right? And when I asked to borrow it, literally the people in the special collections told me that I was the first person to ever have requested that specific item, ever. And when they brought the box, I opened the box, and the tape was, like you were saying earlier, had been in that box for so long and had deteriorated to the point where the tape was stuck. And so what they did is they took it to the lab where they handle these sorts of things, and they actually, fixed it and digitized it for me. And then gave me a CD of that audio.
So sick.
And so I'm like, whoa, like not only was I the first one, but I also was like the catalyst to having this thing made accessible to future researchers, which I don't know if anyone else has come back through, right? I mean, I'm probably still the only one who's ever listened to that. And
I don't know, maybe somebody listened to that episode of the podcast and they're like, I want to hear that.
So this is not the first time that it's kind of like a eureka moment as a historian. Like, wow, look at this.
It's very cool.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I hadn't even considered that, but yeah, that's very true.
Well, thank you for bringing this to our attention. And remember, folks, the truth, it's like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it is always good for you. Timoitase.
Tiawi, tiawi.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Atlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromatlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.